Our story begins with a voice announcing that the engagement to Archduke Valdrova has been decided, as a hand seals a document. In front of a seated man, Ferda Roznova hears that he should know exactly what this means. The protagonist, Ferda Roznova, reflects on the news of his engagement to the Archduke. For a noble, these words were like the end of his life, and there were only two possible choices. He could refuse the engagement and be cast out of the family, or accept it and be completely destroyed. But young Ferda only wanted one thing, which was to belong to his family and be accepted by them. The story reveals that he was the third illegitimate and sickly son of a family of knights. Even though no one was ever on his side, the young man endured everything in silence and kept going. He dedicated himself and kept trying, never once thinking about giving up on his goal. From a window, an older man watched him with a searing expression on his face. The boy hoped that one day he would finally be recognized for all his efforts. Another boy approaches Ferda and comments on the rumors about his knight training. Shortly after, Ferda is on the ground, overwhelmed, while the other says he never had that right. The boy continues and insults him because of his blue eyes and unknown origin. All Ferda wanted was to be accepted as part of the family, and nothing else mattered to him. But the man who watched him from the window simply turned his back and ignored him completely. He realizes that his family's eyes had turned away from him a long time ago. Back in the present, Ferda Roznova makes his decision and says he is leaving the family. The older man stares at him with a serious expression, showing no emotion at all. He agrees with the young man's decision, who now stands in front of the mansion gates. The man then declares that from that moment on, Ferda is no longer a member of the Roznova family. The boy looks at his calloused hand and thinks that the man knew how hard he had tried. At that moment, anger takes over Ferda, and his eyes shine with a dark power. With a heart full of hatred, the young man swears he will never forgive him for what he did. A red energy emerges around him, forming a magical circle of immense power. He promises to make him regret abandoning him, and on that day he became a mage. That was how, at 18 years of age, Ferda Roznova awakened as a powerful mage. However, he was already considered too old to start training compared to the other apprentices. The others mock him, saying it would take decades for him to learn the basics of magic. Ferda doesn't care and releases his mana, startling the other students with such power. A red circle appears in his hands because his mana feeds on hatred and vengeance. The sphere of energy explodes with devastating force, showing the extent of his power. The more he hates someone, the stronger he becomes, and everyone around him is overcome. After reaching the sixth circle of magic through vengeance, there was only one place for him to return. He returned to his old home and made the servants who mocked him face their own downfall. Afterward, the protagonist made the first and second sons hate each other deeply. The manipulation continued until the two brothers ended up destroying each other in a brutal fight. Finally, it was the turn of his father, the man he hated most in all the world. Ferda holds him and tells him to look closely at the proud family he built. The man finally broke completely after witnessing the end of everything before his eyes. And so, everything connected to the Roznova family simply disappeared from history forever. Ferda Roznova's eyes shine with a dark power and endless thirst for revenge. But even after everything, that still wasn't enough for him, and many others opposed him. Ferda was declared public enemy of the continent, and several warriors united to stop him. But he survived once again and reached the 8th circle, the highest level for a human. Even though he became an archmage, he knew that people's hatred wouldn't disappear anytime soon. Therefore, he needed absolute power to crush anyone who got in his way. Ferda then began a research what the final ingredient was to reach the 9th circle. He discovers what he needs and wonders if this is just a cruel joke of fate. To become a demigod, he needed the heart of the red dragon, Archduchess Valdrova. Thinking of the irony of fate, he sets out on his journey to find the legendary creature. Before an enormous red dragon, Ferda reflects on how the person who would be his fiancé would end up being the one to come to take his life and end his journey of power. The young mage grits his teeth in pain as he strives to fight the enormous dragon. He shouts for the tyrant Valdrova to be defeated by his hand so he can fulfill his goal. The red dragon then stares at him and says she knows people call her a tyrant. Valdrova explains that she has never left her home and asks the reason for so much hatred against her. With a furious look, Ferda asks if she really thinks she did nothing wrong. He screams that she is the root of all his misery and that everything started because of her. Valdrova then asks if it is her fault, and Ferda confirms that it is, with total certainty. The young man says that the idea of a dragon wanting a human companion ruined his life completely. After hearing his words, the Archduchess seems to understand the situation and bows her head. Ferda is confused by her reaction and doesn't understand what just happened at that moment. But he ignores it because the conversation gave him enough time to gather his mana for an attack. Valdrova raises her head and says she understands everything now and prepares for the final blow. At that moment, the dragon advances with her claw in a quick and direct attack against the mage. Ferda is hit squarely and a magical circle forms to trap him and cause damage. A huge explosion of power occurs, showing the strength of the Archduchess' attack. The protagonist is gravely injured by the blow and can barely stay on his feet. He then realizes that Valdrova drove her own claw into her chest, injuring herself severely. Not understanding anything, Ferda wonders why she hurt herself on purpose like that. Valdrova reminds him that his magic needs the heart of a dragon to reach the next level. He finally understands that she is trying to destroy her own heart and screams for her to stop. An intense light begins to shine from the dragon's chest as she prepares the final blow. Ferda despairs because this is his only chance to reach the ninth circle of power. He then fires a powerful burst of energy in the direction of the Archduchess's heart. The attack hits the target squarely while the mage curses the dragon for her attitude. Valdrova feels the impact of the blow, and her body is thrown backward by the force of the magic. An even brighter light shines from the wound, and Ferda screams in despair at the scene. He can't believe what is happening and wonders what happened to the dragon's heart. Inside his eye, Ferda Roznova sees the reflection of a golden heart pulsing with energy. Before him, floating in the air, Archduchess Valdrova's heart is completely intact. A voice echoes in his mind asking him to take it, and the young man doesn't understand why. He asks Valdrova why she went so far instead of simply finishing him off. She explains that she did it because her existence made him miserable, and Ferda is in shock. A bright light shines, and the protagonist begins to see the Archduchess's memories. Valdrova hated herself for a long time and despised the violent blood in her veins. She felt a desire to destroy everything for no reason and couldn't control her impulses. This was the unstoppable version of herself that she feared so much and couldn't control. In a fit of rage, she destroyed an entire city and frightened all the inhabitants. Her mere existence was enough to scare people and cause great despair. Valdrova thought everything would be resolved if she died, but she still wished for happiness. With tears in her eyes, the Archduchess regrets all the suffering she caused. She says that since everyone became miserable because of her, she hopes Ferda finds peace. The dragon's body slowly dissolves into the darkness, leaving only the heart behind. Ferda is paralyzed and wonders what strange feeling that was which took over his body. He feels a bitter taste and a sensation he had never experienced in his life. The mage then shouts in anger, saying she is trying to get into his head until the end. He composes himself and reminds himself that the path to the ninth circle is right in front of him. Ferda takes the golden heart, which is the essence of a dragon that lived for all eternity. He knows that if he absorbs this immense power, his life will change forever and he will have everything. The young man then begins the ritual and screams as the heart's energy enters his body. He thinks that finally he will surpass humanity and be reborn as a true demigod. An explosion of blinding light envelops him as his body absorbs the dragon's power. Suddenly, he finds himself in a dark space with his body shining and understands nothing. Ferda is sure he consumed the heart, but something seems completely wrong. He feels as if he had fallen into a bottomless swamp that pulls him into the darkness. The young man wonders if this is a side effect of consuming the dragon's heart. At that moment, an overwhelming flood of emotions begins to take over his mind. A beam of energy strikes his head, forcing him to see and feel everything Valdrova felt. Ferda wonders if these are the memories and feelings of the Archduchess he killed. With his hair now white, he is shocked and finally understands the truth behind everything. He saw an ancient and deep despair that made his seem small and insignificant. All his rage and hatred that ended her life now seemed meaningless. His feelings were painfully insignificant, and Ferda wonders what he has done. He questions what he so desperately wished for and remembers his distant past. A memory of his lonely childhood appears in his mind, showing a small boy. The young Ferda stares at him with determination, and the answer to his question is a simple no. He remembers that all he ever wanted was to build a simple and happy family. His true dream was not power or vengeance, but just to live in peace with those he loved. Ferda then wonders if Valdrova, deep down, wished for the same thing as him, a simple life. With a look of deep regret, he realizes that everything he did was meaningless. He looks at her body on the ground and remembers that she had already been defeated by his hands. With tears in his eyes, the weight of his actions finally collapses onto his shoulders. But he remembers the only spell a ninth circle mage can use, a wish. Even thinking it is all useless, he uses his power to cast the most powerful spell that exists. Suddenly, the young man wakes up startled and hears a familiar voice calling his name. Understanding nothing, he wonders where he is and sees the room from the beginning of his journey. His father, Ermbalt Roznova, reprimands him for being distracted during their conversation. Ferda remembers that his father was defeated and realizes that this was an important day. At that moment, Ermbalt announces that his engagement to Archduke Valdrova has been decided. The dark-haired young man hears the same words that led him down the path of vengeance. His father begins to explain what would happen if he refused the engagement to the Archduke. Ferda looks down and with a slight smile, realizes he really managed to go back in time. With a calmness that surprises his father, the protagonist says he understands the situation. He decides he will not run away this time and will formally accept the engagement to Valdrova. In another room, the second son, Hukin Roznova, does not believe that Ferda accepted the deal. He thought Ferda would beg for his life instead of marching into a trap. A servant informs him that the young man dismissed the servants and is alone in his room. Hukin decides to go see his brother's miserable face before his departure. Ferda is in his room when he hears footsteps approaching his door rapidly. His brother Hukin enters yelling and asks why he hasn't left for his destination yet. The young man is shocked to see the calm expression on his younger brother's face. He expected to find Ferda crying and begging to cancel the arranged engagement. But the young man is getting ready by himself and questions him for entering without knocking. Ferda explains that since he won't have help anymore, he needs to get used to dressing himself. Hyukin is suspicious and asks if he knows what it means that the engagement has been finalized. The protagonist responds coldly that yes, it means he will be cast out of the family. Awkwardly, Hyukin says that in fact, he will be defeated if he continues with this madness. Furta stares at him with a serious look and says he is well aware of all the risks involved. Hyukin reminds him that Valdrova's first fiancé was the third prince of the empire. The prince was a perfect man who had everything and even refused the throne to volunteer. But just one day after arriving for the engagement with Archduchess Valdrova, the prince was found completely terrified and traumatized by the experience. He was brutally hurt and almost didn't survive the meeting with the Red Dragon. Hyukin then asks if Furta thinks he can survive something that not even the prince could handle. But he gives up arguing and says he won't stop a fool from going to his end. He threatens him, saying not to think about running away or challenging the Roznova family. Furta responds calmly and says that his brother should learn to control his desires. He reveals that everyone knows how Hyukin looks at his older brother's wife, and it leaves him shocked. Hyukin is furious, but Furta warns him calmly to hold back, even though he really wants to hit him. The protagonist says that unlike when he was a child, his face is valuable now, and a bruise wouldn't be good. He then turns away and says the journey is long, and he is already leaving for his destination. A soft breeze blows while the young man moves away from his brother and walks toward the carriage. An elderly servant says goodbye, crying, saying it was an honor to serve him for all those years. Furta thinks the man is lying, because if it were an honor, he wouldn't have poisoned his food. He remembers how he grew up sickly, thinking he was weak, but then he realized the truth. Thinking of those days, the young man feels so much disgust that he wants to deal with the servant right there. But instead, he just holds the man's collar and says he worked hard for years. The servant is scared, and Furta says that taking care of someone like him must not have been easy. He enters the carriage and asks the servant to take care of the Roznova family in his absence. Already inside the vehicle, the young man reflects that his mind is at peace because he already had his revenge before. Looking out the window, he observes the landscape passing by as the carriage follows its path. He no longer feels the anger and thirst for vengeance that consumed him for so long in his life. The protagonist thinks about his past self and how the magic he used was like a drug. At first, it was exciting, but over time, it became something he couldn't control anymore. With a dark smile on his face, his old version sank deeper and deeper into power. When madness took over, everything seemed exciting and even euphoric for the young mage. But now, traveling in peace in the carriage, Furta decides he doesn't want to live that way anymore. He closes his eyes and breathes deeply, thinking that feeling peace for the first time isn't so bad. The carriage stops, and the coachman warns that they have arrived at the destination. To Furta's surprise, a wooden sign at the entrance of the forest warns that this is the Duke's territory and entry is prohibited. Furta gets off with his luggage and sits next to the sign, waiting for the next step. The carriage departs at high speed, with the coachman shouting for him to take care and stay well. Now alone, he thinks about learning a little magic to survive in case a wild animal attacks. Suddenly, a leaf flies past his face, and he notices something strange in the air. He turns and sees a figure in the distance, realizing he is no longer alone in the forest. A girl with white hair and a maid's outfit approaches and introduces herself as Ruri, Valdrova's servant. Ruri asks if he is Lord Furta Roznova, and the young man confirms his identity to her. The girl then says she will accompany him to the castle and points in the direction they must follow. In his mind, Furta remembers how the Empire thought it was powerful but was far from perfect. There was a land of demons that humanity couldn't conquer, and it was full of monsters. But the one who stopped the advance of the monster horde and protected the border was the Red Dragon Valdrova. Furta finds it ironic that even though she defends everyone, they still call her a demon dragon. People don't hesitate to spread rumors that she is creating an army of monsters. But the young man knows that if those same people stood in front of the dragon, they wouldn't say anything. At that moment, Ruri turns to him and says there is no need to worry about anything. She guarantees that as long as he is by her side, no monster will dare to attack recklessly. He asks how long it will take to arrive, and she responds that the walk takes 2 hours. Ruri then reveals that if she were alone, the flight would take exactly 10 seconds. Furta observes Ruri and concludes that as he thought, she is not an ordinary maid. He understands that she is a subordinate who inherited a dragon's blood, a dragon descendant. Knowing this, the protagonist decides to test the limits of his new guide and her patience. He suggests that they fly to the lair, but Ruri asks if she would have to carry him. Furta says he can fly, but the girl responds that she simply doesn't want to do that. The young man is speechless at the direct and unexpected refusal of the Duchess's servant. He then suggests a break, but Ruri insists they continue because her mistress is waiting. With a forced smile, Furta realizes that the journey will be more difficult than he imagined. He reflects with irony that getting married is never an easy task for anyone in the world. After a long walk, they finally arrive at an enormous metal door. Ruri knocks on the door and announces to her mistress that her fiancé has finally arrived. Furta feels an overwhelming presence and wonders if a dragon's power is that great. She says she will receive the message and asks him to wait, but the young man suggests speaking directly. Ruri gets irritated and asks if he dares to think about standing before her mistress, and Furta accepts. Shortly after, Ruri returns and prepares to deliver the message from Duchess Valdrova. The message begins by praising Ferda's courage for going there even knowing her brutality. However, she continues by saying she has no desire for a forced engagement against his will. The Duchess then asks for him to return home, leaving Ferda surprised by the order. He thinks that in his past life, he would have accepted the offer to leave right away. But he is different now, and the engagement is now his own choice and no longer an order. The young man declares that he will not back down and wishes to proceed with the engagement to the Duchess. He asks if she won't deliver his response, and Ruri, irritated, says she understood the message. Shortly after, a new message arrives for the protagonist, this time with an offer. Valdrova praises his determination and offers great wealth for him to restart his life. With all that gold, he could leave the place and build a new life anywhere else. But Ferda walks over the coins and states that he has no interest in power or wealth. He extends his hand and says the only thing that really matters to him now is his engagement to Duchess Valdrova, to the surprise of everyone present. Ruri sighs deeply, seeming completely frustrated with the young man's stubbornness. The servant then clenches her fist, her patience with Ferda Roznova reaching its limit. She says she won't waste her breath anymore and orders him to leave the place immediately. Ferda asks if that was the message, but Ruri says those words are her own. Her hands transform into claws, and she warns that if he refuses to leave there, she will release all her power to force him to obey and leave the dragon's territory. Ferda is pushed by the pressure and recognizes the ability as the feared dragon's fear. Ruri accuses him of being immortal, consumed by power and ambition, not caring about Valdrova. The protagonist finally understands and says that was why the third prince was defeated. Ruri explains that the prince's head was full of plans to exploit and subjugate her mistress. She says he was a brazen fool for thinking he could hide his obvious greed. Ferda takes a step forward and agrees with her, saying the prince was indeed very arrogant. Ruri throws him to the ground with force and says that in her eyes, he is no different from the prince. She accuses him of deceiving her mistress and asks if he wishes to meet the same end as the third prince. Even under pressure, Ferda Roznova maintains his calm and gives a slight smile on his face. He then swears that there isn't an ounce of deceit in his words, leaving Ruri surprised. The young man states that he was neither coerced nor did he come looking for profit or any personal gain. In his mind, he remembers the final moment when Valdrova gave her heart to him. Ferda promises that this time, he will stay by her side as the man who will be her fiancé. He says that, since they will be a couple, she must speak directly to him and not through a servant. Ruri's hands transform into claws, and she calls him an insolent and cheeky idiot. With a cry of fury, she attacks him for daring to say so many meaningless things to her. The protagonist is thrown backward by the impact of the blow and falls to the ground without reacting. Ruri tells him to take a moment and walks away, while Ferda agrees with her request. In another room, the servant uses magic to transmit the message to the Archduchess. She then finishes reporting everything the young man just said to her powerful mistress. The servant addresses Valdrova with great respect, calling her one of the 12 great rulers. A female voice asks with a tone of surprise if that was really what he said. Valdrova appears in her human form and says she is curious to know what kind of person he is. She asks Ruri what he was like, and the servant responds that he is an incredibly weak human. Ruri continues saying he is ugly and suggests they get rid of him, but Valdrova reprimands her. The servant apologizes and admits his face is handsome, but the mistress says that's not what matters. Sighing, Ruri finally admits that young Ferda Roznova is not an ordinary person. She explains that because she is a dragon descendant, it is very easy for her to scare mortals. But that man didn't show the slightest fear, even after she released her aura. Ruri concludes that because of this, he must be able to look her mistress directly in the eyes. The servant smiles, satisfied with the conclusion she reached about the future fiancé's courage. She thinks to herself that this is a good thing, and that he may be different from the others. Valdrova reflects that she finally found a human capable of meeting her gaze without fear. She believes that now they will be able to face each other normally like a real couple. Ruri questions the word normally, still a bit suspicious of the young man's intentions. But she accepts her mistress's decision and prepares to give the final answer to Ferda. The servant returns and announces that the mistress decided to proceed with the engagement as he wished. She then guides him through a dark corridor and says she will take him to the guest room. Ferda enters a luxurious room and thinks the place is better kept than he imagined. He asks who takes care of the place, and Ruri responds that she does all the maintenance herself. She explains that she is her mistress's only servant and calls him a guest, to his surprise. He questions the term, and Ruri says the ceremony hasn't been held yet, and he is just a guest. Ferda understands and asks when the ceremony will be, and she responds that it will be in 1 month. Ruri explains that it will be a quiet event, just the three of them, the mistress, her, and the guest. The protagonist then says he understands and accepts the conditions imposed by his fiancée. He reflects on the deadline and begins to think about what he will do during the next month at the castle. Ruri remains silent for a moment, observing Ferda with a serious expression on her face. She then says that no one promised him an easy life and that the deadline is for him to prove his worth. Ruri points at him and says he has 1 month to have a status that matches her mistress. She challenges him to prove that he is qualified to be the fiancé of such a great and powerful presence. Ferda thinks with a sigh that it seems getting married will be a very difficult task again. He asks if the challenge is the mistress's will, but Ruri says it is of her own will. She explains that her mistress is very oblivious, but she cannot simply ignore the situation. Even with a weak body, she asks him to prove that he has potential for the future. If he fails, even being a fie, he will not be recognized as the dragon's companion. Ferda ponders her words and seems to think about how he will handle the challenge. With a determined look, he thinks his fiancée has good people by her side to protect her. He recognizes that even not liking him, Ruri always puts her mistress first. But the young man wonders why, at the final moment of his past life, no one was there to help. He accepts the challenge and asks how far he needs to go if he must become the emperor. Ferda understands he needs to show potential convincing enough to surpass an emperor. With a confident smile, he says he understands what needs to be done to prove his worth. Ruri is surprised by his calm and cannot understand the reason for so much confidence. She questions him, but Ferda guarantees he is not underestimating the situation at all. He promises that in 1 month, he will show her an ability that will be enough to convince her. The servant is suspicious and wonders what he is basing his confidence on. Outside, night falls over the castle, illuminated by the full moon and the stars. In his room, Ferda prepares to prove his potential, even without having abilities at the moment. But he knows that the experience of reaching the 9th circle is something only he possesses in this world. For a mage, the first circle is the most important, as it determines the inclination of mana. The blue circle, made with calm meditation, is slow but stable, the path that most choose. The red circle, born from turbulent emotions, is fast but dangerous and leads to madness. He knows that if he follows the same path of hatred, he will get strong faster, but he remembers the end. This time, Ferda decides he will follow a different path so as not to falter and have the same end. A week passes and the young man continues his preparations inside the dragon's castle. He sits on his room's floor and begins to meditate to try to awaken his magical power. A sphere of blue energy forms in his hands while he tries to control the mana. But the energy dissipates and he realizes he failed once again in his training. He thinks that creating the blue circle takes 3 years, but with his memories, it should be fast. With only 3 weeks remaining, Ruri enters the room with his meal and asks if he is preparing. Ferda confirms, but she realizes that compared to the beginning, nothing has changed in his progress. The protagonist says it will work if he keeps trying, while he eats calmly. But he knows there is no progress, and that he needs a different approach to succeed. Suddenly, the table begins to shake violently, startling the young man and the servant. He asks what the vibration is, and Ruri explains that her mistress is subduing monsters. She tells him that Valdrova is personally eliminating the monsters from the cursed land in the east. With a serious expression, Ferda realizes that Valdrova is in a very complicated situation. He then tells Ruri he wants to see the battle with his own eyes, to her surprise. The servant warns him it would be better if he didn't go, but the young man asks the reason for the refusal. Ruri explains that a human's sane mind would never be able to handle the sight of the battle. She provokes him, saying that unless he wants to embarrass himself before the ceremony, it is better not to watch. Ferda hits the table and refuses the warning, saying he will not give up on his decision. He states that it is his duty as her companion, and he wants to watch the fight with his own eyes. Ruri then opens her wings, and the two fly at high speed toward the battlefield. After a quick flight, the servant announces that they have finally arrived at the fight's location. Ferda falls to the ground nauseous and thinks that the speed was incredible, almost like a teleport. He feels sick, but Ruri warns him not to worry about her and to look ahead. With a serious expression, the servant tells him to get up and look at what is happening. Ferda gets up, and the two observe from a cliff the scene of destruction right below them. He is completely shocked and speechless at the sight of the ongoing battle. Before him, in a dark valley, an enormous serpent monster is fighting against Valdrova. The creature coils and prepares to attack the red dragon with all its strength. An explosion happens when the serpent and Valdrova clash in a brutal combat. The monster screams in pain while the serpent's 2 heads fight against the dragon. Valdrova digs her claws in the enemy's body, causing a grave wound to the creature. The Archduchess continues her relentless attack, showing her power and ferocity in the fight. She prepares to use one of her most powerful abilities to end the battle. Valdrova then transforms into her humanoid form and launches a powerful breath of fire. Ruri watches the scene with admiration, impressed by her mistress's overwhelming power. The serpent monster opens its mouth to counterattack, trying to defend itself from the dragon's fire. A huge explosion of fire consumes the battlefield, showing the strength of the attack. Ferda feels the impact of the shockwave and struggles to stay on his feet before the power. He falls to his knees and wonders if Valdrova really possesses that much power. At that moment, the young man hears the dragon's powerful roar echoing throughout the valley. Ruri stares at him and asks if he finally understood her mistress's true nature. She says it is ridiculous for a human to dare join a dragon as powerful as Valdrova. The servant shows him the true form of the one who will be his companion in the future. She repeats that it is ridiculous for a mere human to dare to unite with a dragon of such magnitude. Ruri emphasizes that this is the true form of the one who will become his companion. The servant observes the young man on the ground, trembling before the demonstration of power he witnessed. She thinks he is trembling as she expected, and that was why she warned him before. She explains that in the blood of a red dragon, there exists the nature of an evil dragon, an existence that cannot live without destroying with a fierce intention to always fight. Ruri concludes that he will be in the middle of the crossfire, and that only determination will not be enough. She believes that humans and dragons can never become one, and that her mistress's dream is in vain. But, to her surprise, Ferd is smiling and says that the sight was truly magnificent. Ruri is in shock and doesn't believe that instead of fear, Ferd is feeling admiration. With a pale face, she wonders if the young man is some kind of crazy masochist. Night falls over the castle and the stars shine in the sky, illuminating the dark landscape. Back in his room, Ferda thinks he prepared for the impact, but it was more than he expected. He lies in bed completely exhausted and feels his body aching after the experience. The servant Ruri escorted him back to his quarters with an expression of concern. The young man feels relieved that his mind returned intact, but knows he lost time. He wonders why he wanted so much to watch that battle even knowing the risks. Thinking about the scene he witnessed, he sits in a field and reflects on the dragon's power. An image of Valdrova in her dragon form appears in his mind, filling him with emotion. He admits it was terrifying, but at the same time, he wants to continue observing her. Ferda understands that all her actions, like fighting against monsters and hiding, are just to protect what she loves and the people who are important to her. He sees the path of a noble red knight who chose a path of suffering. With a smile, the young man admires the magnificence of his future fiancée's dedication. And for someone like her, being with him seems like something he needs to strive to deserve. Suddenly, he feels the energy of the red circle rising in his chest once again. He knows that is not the type of mana he needs and that he cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. A vision of a red armor appears in his mind while he fights against the power. The image of the red knight becomes clearer, showing her strength and determination. Ferda wonders if that vision is connected in some way with Duchess Valdrova. He realizes that the more he remembers the battle, the clearer his mana circuits become. An emotion that is not anger or vengeance begins to take over his being completely. He decides to focus on this emotion, compressing it and spinning it rapidly in his mind. A sphere of brilliant energy forms in his hands while he channels the new power. With one last effort, Ferda manages to finally draw a single circle of magic. He looks at the energy in his hand and realizes that this time, the power is completely different. The young man promises himself that the same future and the same mistakes will not happen again. The next day, Ruri enters the room and is shocked to realize the change in Ferda. He praises her perception, and Ruri doesn't believe he managed to break his circuits overnight. Ferda responds that he managed it because he is not an ordinary person and asks what she thinks. Ruri admits he met the qualifications, but Ferda knows he still has a long way to go. He wipes his face with a cloth, feeling refreshed after the advance in his training. The protagonist asks if there is a place for him to practice magic, and soon targets are set up. Ruri cleans the training field, showing her efficiency and strength as the Duchess's servant. She announces that the training field is ready as he asked, with several targets. Ferda praises her work, impressed that she built everything in just half a day. Ruri asks what he will practice, and he responds that he will train the control of his power. The servant is confused because for her, controlling mana is as natural as breathing. Ferda asks if her behavior seems barbaric, since she is also a dragon descendant. Ferda Roznova remains silent, processing the servant Ruri's words and behavior. He thinks that those who are born with power do not understand the human effort to achieve it. The young man focuses and remembers that the basis of mana control is the stability of the blue circle. But his circle is red, which requires a completely different and more complex approach. He needs to agitate his emotions and at the same time control them to release his true power. In his past life, it took him a year to extract mana and another to condense it into a sphere. It was an immense effort to recreate the mana bullet he had mastered with so much sacrifice. But now, with his memories and experience, he can perform the same feat in 2 minutes. Ruri is shocked to see that he managed to control his magical power on the first try. Ferda then creates 2 more mana spheres, showing his mastery over the new ability. He points to the targets and prepares to fire, testing the precision of his control. The 3 energy spheres fly at high speed toward the wooden targets. They hit the targets squarely, creating a large explosion and demonstrating their power. The protagonist smiles with confidence and says that after all, he still hasn't lost his touch. Ruri watches him with a serious expression, completely surprised by his ability. Later, she reports Ferda's progress to Valdrova, leaving the Duchess impressed. Valdrova asks how Ferda appears to Ruri's eyes, since she knows the outside world. The servant responds that he was perfect from the beginning, but that makes him suspicious and dangerous. She believes it is impossible for a human to reach such a level without making a single mistake. Valdrova is surprised that Ruri recognizes a human to such a point and becomes even more interested. The Duchess decides to try to trust him, since he said he sought her out with pure intentions. Ruri worries, because her mistress was already deeply hurt by humans in the past. She swears to ensure that this doesn't happen again and wishes to be able to probe Ferda's intentions. The servant then suggests that Valdrova entrust that to him to test his loyalty. The Archduchess smiles and asks what she means by that, already understanding the plan. Shortly after, Ferda Roznova is summoned to an assembly with the local lords. The nobles of the Eastern Front gather, surprised to have been summoned by the Grand Duchess. One of them complains about the meeting, but another informs him that the Duchess's new fiancé is arriving. They mock the idea of someone accepting the engagement and prepare to meet the fool. The lords continue to mock Ferda, calling him a novice who doesn't even know how to use a sword. An older man says he won't last long and that there is no reason to worry. Lord Count Overa Consulis agrees, saying the fiancé will end up being destroyed anyway. At that moment, the doors open and a guard announces the entry of Lord Ferda Rosnova. The young man enters the room with a calm and determined expression, surprising those present. Ferda wonders why he needs to meet with the lords and if he has to go at that moment. Rory explains that he needs to know why his mistress is called Grand Duchess Valdrova. She reveals that Valdrova defeated the Black Dragon Godwin, the source of evil and the Demon King. For this achievement, she received the title and the territory, and now Ferda must manage them. He understands that while she takes care of external affairs, he will be the lord of the mansion. Ferda realizes that she is giving him authority, but suspects she still doesn't trust him. Before the assembly, Ferda Rosnova introduces himself as the future consort of Grand Duchess Valdrova. Before they begin, he asks a direct question, wanting to know how the lords would like to be treated. The nobles realize that Ferda is not an easy target and that the hierarchy will be established right there. Lord Count Overa Consulis takes the floor and says they are lords under the light of the Grand Duchess. He continues saying that it is natural to show respect to her future consort, but makes a caveat. The lord reminds them that they all swore loyalty to the empire long before Ferda was born. With this, he suggests that the young man should also show them the proper courtesy and respect. Ferda asks if their final answer is whether he should speak respectfully or look down on them. With a cold look, he insists that the lords answer only that question he asked. Lord Overa Consulis yields and says it is correct that the consort speaks down to them. Ferda then explains that it won't change much and they should continue to manage their territories. One of the lords gets irritated by the insinuation that they exploit their own people to get rich. The protagonist apologizes, saying it was just a slip of the tongue without any malice. The irritated lord thinks that now he understands why Ferda was abandoned by his family. He points at Ferda and accuses him of being just a first circle mage without any real power. Ferda hears the provocation and responds calmly that a fourth circle mage is only decent. The lord is furious with the insult and asks in anger what he just said. He thinks that a fourth circle mage is a VIP and that rank is determined by ability. The man prepares to attack, saying that a first circle mage cannot insult him. At that moment, Ferda interrupts him with his hand and says he has a proposal for him. The young man suggests that they have a duel to test the abilities of a mere first circle mage. The other lords comment that the result is obvious and that it will be good for Ferda to learn a lesson. Rory watches the scene and wonders if the lord named Thessalos will go easy on Ferda. The two opponents position themselves in an arena, ready to start the magic duel. Ferda provokes his opponent, asks which spell he intends to use in the battle between them. Thessalos is offended by the question and accuses the young man of being rude for asking for his trump card. He then mocks Ferda, saying he can give up if he is afraid of what will happen. The lord announces he will use the fourth circle spell, the powerful magic explosion. The audience is in shock, because the magic is designed for maximum destructive power. Ferda responds calmly that he will also inform his spell the simple mana shot. Thessalos laughs at the idea of being defeated by a basic spell, but Ferda guarantees he won't lose. The protagonist says with confidence that by chance, he knows many things about magic and power. Irritated by the arrogance, Thessalos begins to gather his mana to cast the spell. An enormous magic circle forms before him while he prepares the magic explosion. Ferda watches and realizes that the lord is also a user of the red circle, and finds it a shame. Before the opponent finishes, the young man fires his red mana spheres at high speed. Thessalos is in shock to see his magic circle break before even finishing the spell. With 4 mana spheres spinning, Ferda declares calmly that the match is already over. In panic, the lord tries to conjure a defensive spell to protect himself from the imminent attack. But a ribbon of red energy envelops him, leaving him confused and without power to react. Thessalos realizes the attack was not for him, but for the magic circle he was conjuring. In shock, he wonders how Ferda managed to destroy his circle before it was completed. The lord falls to the ground defeated and questions if that is really the level of a first circle mage. The technique of destroying a magic circle is something that not even he, a fourth circle mage, can do. With his hand on the floor, Thessalos feels the pain of defeat and the humiliation of losing to a novice. He is on his knees, gasping and unable to believe what just happened in the duel arena. The lord cannot accept that he lost the battle to a mage who should be much weaker. Ferda approaches calmly and asks if he concede his defeat, ending the duel between them. Thessalos is silent, processing the question and the reality of his crushing defeat. With a look of determination, he decides he wants to become stronger at any cost. He then admits his defeat and says he will do anything to become stronger in the future. The other lords don't believe Thessalos lost, and Rory reprimands them for doubting. Ferda praises his opponent's magic and says that seeing the military strength of the East makes him calm. Thessalos laughs and says that being demoted from the capital wasn't all bad, because he met Ferda. The lord introduces himself formally as Thessalos Walcher, and Ferda recognizes him from his past life. Thessalos is surprised to know that Ferda knows him, but doesn't remember meeting him. The protagonist says he knows him very well, because in his past life he was his benefactor. He then touches the defeated lord's forehead, who doesn't understand what is happening. Ferda fires a mana shot directly into Thessalos' head to the shock of everyone. The lord's silhouette is seen while the attack hits him squarely with full force. The other lords scream in horror and cannot believe what they just witnessed. Thessalos' body falls to the ground lifeless, while Ferda watches him with a cold look. He says he cannot leave him alive, because if he did, he would make his fiancée sad in the future. The audience stares at the scene in silence, completely terrified by the young man's attitude. The fallen lord murmurs Ferda's name before his last breath in the castle arena. The other nobles realize that Ferda, the Duchess's future consort, killed a noble. They conclude that it was a clear murder, since the duel had ended and he surrendered. But no one dares to take a step forward to challenge the man who just showed his power. Ferda turns to the lords and asks why they are so tense if it is because of Thessalos. He says the man deserved what happened, and that leaving him alive would only bring sadness to the Duchess. One of the lords questions how he can know that if it was the first time he met Thessalos. With a serious look, Ferda explains that Grand Duchess Valdrova wishes for human happiness. He says she fights for humans, but Thessalos would go against her wishes in the future. The lords are confused and think the explanation is ridiculous and doesn't make any sense. Ferda guarantees he doesn't care about what the rest of them do and prepares to leave. Back in his carriage, the trip back to the castle is turbulent and uncomfortable. Inside the vehicle, he sits exhausted, feeling the effects of excessive mana use. His head spins, and he feels dizzy after the intense battle and the power he released. He remembers meeting Thessalos and how his mana was drained with a single shot. Besides the fatigue, he feels the nausea from the trip and misses the magic cars of the future. Ruri praises Ferda with sarcasm for having eliminated the Duchess's most loyal subject in his first meeting. He asks if she is talking about Thessalos, and the servant confirms that he was one of the most loyal. The young man thinks this will be a problem and asks if the lord was an honest and upright man. She explains that he was mediocre but that this was the best, because the other lords are worse. Ferda says the engagement must proceed, because his reason for what he did is fully justified. He leans back in the carriage seat, looking tired but confident in his decision. The protagonist then thinks that if his memory is correct, he knows exactly what to do. He remembers that at that exact moment, Thessalos should be committing a grave crime. In front of the Walter House castle, a butler welcomes the guests from the Duke's castle. The man says his master is out, and Ferda responds calmly that it doesn't matter because he is dead. Ruri then hands a bag to the butler, who is shocked and asks what it is. She orders him to hang the bag in a visible place at the castle gates for everyone to see. Upon opening the bag, the butler panics to see his master's head inside it. Already in Thessalos' room, Ruri comments that it seems they came to rob an empty house. She reminds him he needs evidence, but Ferda says she herself helped him with everything. Ruri threatens to cancel the engagement, but the young man finds a hidden door under the bed. He searches for a mechanism to open the secret passage, but finds nothing visible. Impatient, the servant tells him to get out of the way so she can solve the problem. With a determined look, Ruri clenches her fist and prepares to use her dragon strength. She punches the floor with incredible force, breaking the wood and revealing the passage. With the passage open, the servant says calmly for them to enter and investigate the site. The two go down a stone staircase toward a dark and somber basement. They feel a horrible smell, and Ferda comments that it is no surprise with what is down there. Before them, a secret laboratory is full of human and monster bodies all over the place. That was the hideout of a follower of the Demon King, and Thessalos was a dark necromancer. Ferda recognizes one of the bodies as a soldier of the territory, and sees that he was stitched to monster organs. Ruri is furious to realize the Lord was practically begging to be discovered. She concludes that you can't trust humans, and Ferda says the crime justifies his action. The servant then asks how he knew about the existence of that secret and somber place. Ferda is reading a book, and with a satisfied smile, he says he finally found what he wanted. He holds Thessalos' masterpiece, a book about an infinite mana cultivation method. In a memory, Ferda remembers his master and his past life, explaining the book's method. The monster's mana is impure and cannot be used, but the book had a solution for that. The method aimed to replicate a monster's mana production capacity, but in a different way. The goal was to extract pure mana infinitely, becoming a source of unlimited power. Thessalos planned to use his army of undead to crush the nobles who demoted him. He laughed, saying he would soon reach the realm of an archmage with his new and incredible power. In the memory, the old Ferda thinks that knowledge would be very useful for his vengeance. Back in the present, he says thank you, and thinks that the method fell into his hands again. He knows that if he studies this, he could reach the 8th circle several times faster, but he hesitates. Ruri comments that seeing him covet the book shows how human he is, and that no one would know if he stole it. She congratulates him on the opportunity to grow stronger, something all humans desire. Ferda refuses the offer, to the surprise of the servant, who didn't expect that reaction from him. He hands the book to her and orders her to destroy everything in that somber laboratory. Ruri doesn't believe what she hears and questions why he, a mage, doesn't covet such knowledge. Ferda admits that the research has the potential to turn the magic world upside down, but he knows that being seduced by power and causing sadness to the Duchess is not worth it for him. With a firm look, the protagonist asks if she will burn the book and the laboratory for him. Ruri takes the book and says it is not a difficult request and that she can do it without problems. She then uses her magic to create blue flames and burn Thessalos's book completely. While the flames consume everything, Ferda thinks that all magic carries the conjurer's emotions. Just as Thessalos's dark magic was full of hatred, which ended up consuming him from within. He remembers that Thessalos was also a red circle bearer, like he was in the past. Ferda knows that if he inherits his magic, he will be consumed again by emotions he cannot control. He remembers his past self, who could only survive by forcing himself to hate everyone. While the blue flames burn, he feels a relief and says that they burn incredibly well. Ruri observes him and thinks that he is an unpredictable psychopath and a masochist on top of it. She sighs and tells him to leave that moldy place, go back to the castle. Ferda agrees, and the two leave while the fire consumes everything, looking forward to the ceremony.